It was a crisp Thursday morning in the quiet suburbs of Crescent Hills, where the autumn leaves danced in the wind like confetti at a parade. For most, it was just another weekday: coffee, commutes, and checklists. But for Jalen Brooks, 12 years old and freshly pressed in his best shirt and oversized navy blazer, it was a milestone. A moment he'd dreamed about for weeks. In his backpack, tucked neatly inside a folder with creased corners, was a $5,000 scholarship check, a symbol of excellence, dedication, and silent defiance against the odds. Jalen had earned that check by placing first in a national mathematics competition, outscoring students from elite prep academies with resources he could only imagine. His love for numbers had started early, figuring out patterns in cereal box puzzles, then solving algebra long before it showed up in his school books. While other kids played video games, Jalen solved equations to relax. He had a gift, and this check proved it wasn't just talent, it was real, recognized, and valuable. But for Jalen, the check wasn't about the money, it was about independence. It was about proving to himself, to his father, to the world, that he could take care of business. When his father, Victor Brooks, a highly respected financial strategist, offered to drive him to the bank, Jalen politely declined. "I want to do it myself, Dad," he'd said. "I've got everything I need." Victor had smiled, a mix of pride and hesitation in his eyes, but nodded. "Then go show them who you are." And so, with shoulders squared and heart thudding like a drum in his chest, Jalen walked into Wilford National Bank. The glass doors slid open with a gentle whoosh, welcoming him into a space that smelled of carpet glue and copier ink. The lobby was sleek: white marble floors, brushed gold signage, polite murmurs, and low jazz music humming from invisible speakers. Jalen took his place in line, standing among men in suits and women in tailored coats, gripping his folder tightly with both hands. In his mind, he'd rehearsed the moment. "Good morning, I'd like to deposit this check into my new account, please." Simple, straightforward, professional. He wanted to handle it the way his father would. But what Jalen didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly imagined, was that this routine errand would spiral into something else entirely. That within the next hour he would go from honor student to suspected fraud, from proud scholar to a boy in handcuffs. He didn't know that whispers would rise behind him, that security would be called, that grown adults would look at him not as a talented child, but as a threat, all because of the color of his skin. Jalen didn't know he'd be made to stand in front of a crowd, questioned, doubted, detained, not for what he did, but for what he represented in their eyes. But there's something else he didn't know. He wasn't alone. Because in that same lobby, standing quietly behind him in line, was someone watching. Someone who, in just the right moment, would step forward and say the words that changed everything. And later, when all was said and done, when the cameras were gone and the headlines faded, Jalen would remember this day not as the day he was humiliated, but as the day he learned to stand tall. If this story already has your heart pounding, don't stop here. Subscribe to Moments Matter, where true, powerful stories like Jalen's come to life. Be sure to comment when you reach point number 7, where the twist you didn't see coming finally arrives. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to believe again in courage, truth, and the strength of standing up. Because here at Moments Matter, we believe every small act of bravery can create a ripple that moves the world. Jalen's shoes squeaked softly as he stepped forward in line, the crisp folder still pressed tightly against his chest. The gentleman ahead of him was finishing up, laughing casually with the teller, who smiled warmly as she handed back his receipt. It was a comforting, ordinary transaction, the kind Jalen had imagined his would be too. Then it was his turn. He approached the counter with a shy but confident smile, clearing his throat the way he'd practiced in front of the mirror that morning. "Good morning," he said. "I'd like to deposit a check." The teller, a woman in her mid-30s with thin glasses and a nameplate that read Angela, gave him a professional smile, pleasant but impersonal. She reached for the folder, and Jalen handed it over, watching her closely as she slid the check from the sleeve and held it in her manicured fingers. As soon as her eyes scanned the amount, the smile faded, barely noticeably, but to Jalen it felt like a door closing. She looked at him again, this time not with curiosity, but with evaluation. "This is for $5,000, she said. Jalen nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. It's my scholarship from the National Youth Mathematics Invitational." She didn't nod, didn't smile. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and looked back down at the check, as if it might reveal more the second time. "And you said this is your scholarship?" Jalen hesitated. He felt the change in her tone, not overt, not hostile, but different. "Yes, I have the award letter and school ID in the folder too, if you need it." Angela gave a small nod and slid the rest of the documents out from the folder. She looked at them without saying a word. Then she stood up and walked to the side, murmuring something to a colleague. Jalen couldn't hear the words, but he saw the glance over the shoulder, the pause, and that's when he felt it, the shift, not in the room, but in himself, like the floor had tilted just slightly beneath his feet. Angela returned with a tighter smile than before. "If you could just give me a moment, please," she said, then disappeared behind a frosted glass door. Jalen turned and looked around the lobby. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. A man near the waiting area looked over his newspaper to eye Jalen briefly, then returned to his reading. An older woman whispered something to her husband, her eyes flicking toward the boy at the counter. He tried not to fidget. Minutes passed, more than he expected. Then came the clicking of heels. Evelyn Clark, the assistant branch manager, emerged from the hallway in a tailored gray pantsuit, her expression unreadable. She approached the counter and gave Jalen a once-over, her eyes lingering just a beat too long. "I understand you're here to deposit a scholarship check," she said, her voice even but cool. Jalen nodded, keeping his voice steady. "Yes, ma'am, everything's in the folder." She glanced down at the check still on the counter, then looked back at him. "And where exactly did you receive this scholarship?" "From the NOIMI, National Youth Mathematics Invitational. I placed first in my division." The pause was louder than her voice. "We've had incidents," she said vaguely, "with unusual deposits from students lately. So you understand, we have to verify certain things." Jalen's mouth went dry. "I have the documentation. It's all real." Evelyn didn't respond directly. Instead, she picked up the check and turned toward a colleague, whispering something too quiet for Jalen to catch. They huddled, glanced at him again. Someone nodded. Suddenly, he wasn't Jalen the math champion anymore. He was a question mark. He looked around the room again. Only this time, he saw the difference. The man in the suit ahead of him had joked and smiled. The woman behind him was greeted by name. And here he was, a kid with perfect paperwork and still no trust. The moment he'd waited for, planned for, was beginning to slip away, reshaped by doubt, by tone, by hesitation that had nothing to do with math. And for the first time, Jalen realized this wasn't going to be the celebration he thought it would be. Not anymore. Jalen had never felt time move so slowly. The seconds stretched long and quiet as he stood by the counter, hands clasped in front of him, trying to stay calm while Miss Evelyn Clark and another teller whispered in the back. They weren't even pretending to hide it anymore. Their hushed conversation carried the unmistakable weight of suspicion. He could feel it. Not just the way they looked at him, but the way they didn't look at him, as if he were no longer a customer, not a child, not even a person, just a problem to be dealt with. When Evelyn returned to the counter, her eyes no longer tried to disguise their scrutiny. She didn't offer a smile. She didn't ask any more questions. She simply picked up the phone and called someone. She didn't say who. She didn't explain why. Jalen's stomach turned. Something had shifted. Something he didn't have the power to name. A minute later, a uniformed security guard appeared near the entrance, his large frame filling the hallway. He didn't approach at first. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching, waiting. Jalen's eyes flicked to him, then quickly away. His heart started to thump, the rhythm no longer steady but erratic, confused. He looked around the room for some kind of explanation, a friendly face, a signal that everything was okay. But the faces were different now, curious, blank, avoidant. Not one person in the bank looked like they were on his side. Angela, the teller, returned to her station and carefully picked up the folder again. She didn't ask for clarification. She didn't verify any of the information Jalen had brought. Instead, she said something cold and final. "Sir, we're going to have to place a hold on this deposit while we contact the issuing institution." "A hold?" Jalen asked, confused. "But it's real. It's mine." "It's policy," she said, refusing to meet his eyes. "You'll need to wait over there." She gestured to the wall by the lobby chairs, away from the counter, away from the line, away from the space where real customers stood. Jalen obeyed. His legs felt like lead. He sank onto the hard plastic chair and held his backpack on his lap like a shield. Around him, the world moved. A man signed mortgage papers. A woman laughed as she opened a business account. But Jalen sat in silence, in stillness, as if the room had been split in two, and he was the only one on his side. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Then the two officers arrived. Jalen didn't hear their footsteps, but he saw the shift in the room. He looked up and saw two police officers speaking to the security guard, who pointed in his direction. One officer nodded and started walking toward him. Jalen's heart dropped. "Are you Jalen Brooks?" the officer asked, his voice brisk. "Yes," Jalen replied, standing on instinct. I was just trying to deposit." "We've had a call regarding a suspicious transaction," the second officer interrupted. "We're going to need you to come with us to answer some questions." Jalen froze. "What? No, I didn't do anything. It's my scholarship. Please, I brought all the papers." But the first officer was already taking him by the arm. The room grew still. Eyes followed. Whispers buzzed. And before he knew it, his hands were behind his back, and cold metal clicked around his wrists. "I'm just a kid," Jalen said, his voice breaking. No one responded. He wasn't Jalen the math prodigy anymore. He wasn't a customer or even a boy trying to make a deposit. He was a suspect. And the silence of the room told him all he needed to know. In this place, wearing a blazer and holding a check didn't matter. He had stopped being innocent the moment he walked through the door. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Jalen's wrists as the officers led him toward the side entrance of the bank. Every step echoed louder than the last, not because the marble floor amplified the sound, but because the silence of the room had become unbearable. That heavy, haunting kind of silence. The kind that people hold when they're too afraid to speak up and far too comfortable letting injustice play out in front of them. Jalen's face burned, not from guilt, but from humiliation. He could feel the stares on the back of his neck, dozens of them, each one a needle prick, sharp and cold. A child bound at the wrists, escorted like a criminal through a building he had entered just 40 minutes ago, with pride in his chest and a scholarship in his hand. He didn't cry. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But he kept his chin up, even as the lump in his throat threatened to crush him from the inside out. The officer guiding him said nothing. No comfort, no explanation. Just fingers wrapped around Jalen's arm like he was a threat. Like he wasn't 12 years old and terrified. Like he hadn't done everything right. Inside the bank, not a single person said a word. Not the woman with the laptop and pearls who had smiled at him earlier. Not the man who had asked to borrow a pen. Not the bank manager, Evelyn Clark, who now stood near her office doorway, arms folded tightly, pretending this wasn't happening on her watch. No one intervened, because to them it wasn't happening to someone like them. To them it was happening to someone expected to be guilty. And in that moment, Jalen felt something he couldn't quite name. Not just sadness, not just embarrassment. It was something deeper, something colder. He felt erased. Everything he had worked for, his test scores, his trophies, his teacher's recommendations, none of it mattered here. None of it spoke louder than his skin, or his youth, or the neighborhood his family lived in. The people in that room didn't see a scholar. They saw a profile. "Please," he whispered, turning slightly to the officer beside him. "Please just call my dad. He'll explain everything." The officer didn't look at him. "You can talk at the station." The station. Jalen's knees buckled slightly at the word. He'd never even been inside a police car, let alone the station. His only connection to it came from the news, where boys who looked like him never came out with their dignity intact. The crowd inside the bank shifted, but they still didn't speak. They watched like it was entertainment, a real-time cautionary tale. Their silence wasn't just compliance, it was participation. Each glance, each refusal to question what was happening, fed the fire of the injustice now swallowing him whole. Outside, the late morning sun glared down without mercy. Jalen blinked against it as the doors opened. A group of people walking by slowed to watch the scene unfold. A child in cuffs, 2 officers, a bank full of voyeurs behind tinted glass. Jalen didn't fight. He didn't run. All he could do was ask himself one question over and over. What did I do wrong? Not what did they think I did wrong, but what did I do? He had shown up clean, polite, prepared. He had brought documentation. He had followed every rule, every bit of advice his father had ever given him. And still, he was here, in handcuffs, alone. The patrol car door opened with a click, and the officer guided him inside. As the door slammed shut, Jalen stared at his reflection in the thick glass. He didn't see a criminal. He didn't see a threat. He saw a boy who dared to believe that being brilliant was enough. And now he wasn't sure if that had ever been true. The patrol car door had barely closed when the sound of hurried footsteps cut through the thick silence outside the bank. "Wait! Hold it! Stop!" The voice was commanding. Not loud, but unmistakably firm. Urgent. It didn't belong to an officer. It wasn't a parent either. It was someone else. Someone no one expected to speak. The 2 officers turned just as a tall man in a brown trench coat and silver-framed glasses stepped forward from the back of the crowd. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and he carried a quiet authority that made people instinctively move aside. "Let that boy go," he said calmly, but with unmistakable weight. "This is a mistake." The officers looked at him, confused. "Sir, we're in the middle of—" "I know exactly what you're in the middle of," the man interrupted, stepping closer. "And I've seen enough." From his inner coat pocket, he produced a slim leather wallet and opened it without fanfare. A gold federal emblem caught the sunlight. The crowd behind the bank's tinted glass finally stirred. "I'm Judge Harold Emerson, retired federal district court, and I've been standing in line behind this young man for the last 20 minutes. He turned to face the bystanders, his voice rising just enough to be heard inside the bank. "I saw him enter. I saw him wait politely. I heard him speak to the teller with respect and provide all the documents anyone could ask for. And I saw, what you all saw too, that the moment he presented that check, he stopped being a client. He became a suspect." The words landed like thunder in the quiet parking lot. Angela, the teller, had appeared by the glass doors, her mouth slightly open. Evelyn Clark, the assistant manager, stood frozen just a few steps behind her, pale and visibly shaken. "There was no fraud here," Emerson continued, walking closer to the patrol car. "What there was profiling, judgment, and silence." Jalen, still sitting in the back seat, blinked through the haze of shock and disbelief. He'd never seen the man before. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Someone was finally standing up for him, someone who could be heard. The younger officer stepped away and spoke into his shoulder radio. A tense pause followed. Then came the click of the car door unlocking. Slowly, the officer opened it, looking at Jalen with awkward discomfort. "You're free to go, son," he said. Jalen stepped out, unsteady on his feet. His wrists were red where the cuffs had been, his hands trembling from adrenaline and fear. He looked up at the judge, unable to find the words. Emerson placed a firm but kind hand on Jalen's shoulder. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly, "but don't let this moment define you. Let it drive you." Around them, the mood had shifted. Conversations began to stir. Faces in the crowd started to reflect something that hadn't been there before. Shame, guilt, awareness. The silence that had once enabled the injustice had finally been pierced. But this story isn't over, not even close. What happens next will shock you even more. Will the bank take responsibility? Will someone else step up? Or will the system fall back into silence? To find out what happens in key number 7, where the unexpected showdown truly begins, subscribe now to Moments Matter. Leave a comment when you reach the turning point in key number 7. Tell us how it made you feel. Share this video with someone who believes one voice can make a difference, because sometimes that's all it takes. Moments matter, because the right moment with the right voice can change everything. As the crowd began to settle, and Jalen stood silently beside the patrol car, still shaken, Judge Emerson stepped forward, his eyes fixed firmly on the bank's glass entrance. "We need to talk to your branch manager," he said with quiet authority to Evelyn Clark, who had hesitantly approached from inside the bank. Behind her, the rest of the staff stood in uneasy formation, whispers blooming, glances exchanged. The once confident rhythm of the bank had been shattered. The atmosphere had gone from sterile professionalism to a room vibrating with tension and embarrassment. Evelyn hesitated. "Our branch manager isn't in today. I'm acting lead." "Then you'll do," Emerson said, nodding calmly. "And I suggest we step inside and get everything on the record." Inside the bank, the whispers were louder now. Customers stared. Some pulled out phones, not to record, but to pretend they weren't witnessing what they clearly were. Others stood frozen, caught between discomfort and disbelief. Jalen followed Emerson into a small glass-walled office. The officers remained outside, one of them now nervously adjusting his belt, trying to appear indifferent, though the heat in his cheeks betrayed the truth. Across the desk, Evelyn sat down, folding her hands tightly. "This is a misunderstanding," she began. "It's standard protocol to verify any check over—" "Don't," Emerson cut in, voice low but steely. "Let's not hide behind policy when what happened today had nothing to do with bank procedure and everything to do with perception." He turned to Jalen. "Son, can you please show us what you brought in today?" Jalen quietly opened his folder. Inside were his school ID, a certificate with the National Youth Mathematics Invitational Seal, and a copy of the official scholarship award letter, printed on high-grade paper and signed by a nationally recognized academic board. Emerson examined the documents carefully, then passed them across the desk. "I suggest you look at the date," he said to Evelyn, "and the letterhead, and then tell me what exactly raised suspicion." Evelyn's hands trembled as she read through the papers. There was no mistake, no forgery, no ambiguity. I didn't see all of this before," she muttered. Angela didn't what?" Emerson pressed gently but firmly. "Didn't check, didn't look, or didn't believe that a 12-year-old black boy could walk in with a $5,000 check and the credentials to back it up?" The room seemed to shrink under the weight of that truth. Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. Outside the office, a few customers had quietly gathered near the lobby, sensing the shift. One woman murmured something about not being surprised. Another man shook his head, arms folded, visibly upset. The facade was cracking. Emerson sat back in his chair and looked at Evelyn one last time. This boy was profiled, judged before a single document was verified, humiliated in front of strangers, and handcuffed, because no one in this building stopped to think that he might be telling the truth. Jalen sat quietly, his hands still red from the cuffs, but his gaze steadier than it had been since he arrived. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for him now, and for the first time since he entered Wilford National Bank, the truth stood taller than the doubt. The glass doors of Wilford National Bank swung open with a crisp whoosh, letting in a gust of autumn wind, and a presence that instantly shifted the energy of the entire room. Victor Brooks stepped inside, tall, composed, his tailored charcoal gray suit crisp against the soft morning light behind him. He moved with calm precision, a quiet storm wrapped in elegance. His briefcase hung from one hand, his phone in the other, still unlocked on a half-finished text from Jalen's classmate who had seen the scene unfold from outside. He scanned the lobby once, and his eyes landed on his son. Jalen sat in a chair near the manager's office, his backpack crumpled at his feet, red cuffs on his wrists where the handcuffs had left their mark. His blazer, too big, now rumpled, hung off one shoulder. But it was his face that stopped Victor cold. A boy who had been trying to be a man, now looking smaller than he ever had. Victor exhaled once, deeply, then walked forward. "Jalen," he said gently. Jalen looked up, startled, then stood immediately. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His father reached out, placed a hand on his shoulder, and gave a small nod. That single gesture told Jalen everything he needed. You're not alone anymore. Inside the manager's office, Evelyn Clark turned pale at the sight of him. She knew the name. Victor Brooks wasn't just a father. He was one of the most sought-after financial strategists in the state. His firm had helped restructure institutions bigger than Wilford Bank, and now he was standing in her lobby. Mr. Brooks, Evelyn began, forcing composure. I was just explaining to... Victor raised a hand, not rudely, but decisively. I'm not here for an explanation. I'm here for accountability. The temperature in the room dropped. He stepped into the office, eyes never leaving hers. My son came in here today to deposit a check, a real one, with proper ID, with documentation. What he received was doubt, humiliation, and the full force of a system that judged him not on what he brought, but on what he looked like. He paused. His voice didn't rise. He didn't shout. And that made every word land heavier. I've spent my career teaching clients how to measure risk. But this? He gestured around the room. This wasn't risk management. This was bias management. A young black boy walked in with pride, and you decided he didn't belong before you opened a single envelope. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Judge Emerson stood quietly to the side, arms folded, watching. Victor, Emerson said after a moment, I intervened, but it shouldn't have needed someone with a badge or a title. It should have been stopped by basic decency. Victor looked back at Jalen, then to the small red mark still faint on his wrists. He came here with the truth, but none of you saw him. And worse, you made sure no one else did either. Silence filled the room. Outside the glass walls, the bank had gone still again. But this time, the stillness wasn't ignorance. It was reckoning. Victor turned to his son and placed both hands on his shoulders. Let's go, he said simply. And with that, father and son began to walk, not out of defeat, but with the kind of composure that can only come from knowing the truth had finally found its voice. The following morning, the story had already gone viral. A bystander's video capturing the moment Jalen was led out of Wilford National Bank in handcuffs had amassed millions of views overnight. The footage was raw and unfiltered. A 12-year-old boy, visibly distressed, escorted by officers while clutching a folder containing his scholarship documents. The caption read, "Math prodigy mistaken for fraudster." Economic Policy Institute news outlets picked up the story, and soon headlines blared across screens nationwide. Bank accused of racial profiling after detaining young scholar. Public outrage was swift and unrelenting. Social media platforms were inundated with calls for accountability. Hashtags like #JusticeForJalen and #banking. While Black trended for days, prominent figures, from civil rights activists to celebrities, voiced their support for Jalen and condemned the bank's actions. Under mounting pressure, Wilford National Bank issued a public statement. We deeply regret the incident involving Jalen Brooks. We are conducting a thorough internal investigation and are committed to reviewing our policies to ensure such events do not recur. But for many, the apology rang hollow. Victor Brooks, Jalen's father, declined private settlement offers. Instead, he organized a press conference, standing beside his son and Judge Emerson. This isn't just about my son, Victor stated. It's about a system that sees a young black boy not as a scholar, but as a suspect. We demand systemic change, not just apologies. Legal experts weighed in, noting that while federal laws prohibit discrimination in lending, they don't explicitly cover all banking services. This legal gap often leaves victims of racial profiling in financial institutions without clear avenues for redress. Axios. In response, lawmakers introduced the Fair Access to Banking Act, aiming to amend existing civil rights legislation to encompass all banking services. The proposed bill sought to ensure that no individual would face discrimination when accessing financial services, regardless of race or background. Axios. Meanwhile, the bank faced tangible repercussions. Customers began closing their accounts in protest. Community organizations called for boycotts. Shareholders demanded answers during board meetings. The bank's stock experienced a noticeable dip, reflecting the public's waning trust. Internally, Wilford National Bank initiated mandatory bias training for all employees and established a diversity and inclusion task force. They also pledged to invest in community outreach programs, aiming to rebuild trust with marginalized communities. For Jalen, the experience was transformative. He returned to school, greeted by applause from classmates and teachers. Invitations poured in for him to speak at conferences and events, sharing his story and advocating for change. In an interview, Jalen reflected, "I never thought depositing a check would lead to all this, but if my story can help others, then maybe it was worth it." The incident at Wilford National Bank became a catalyst for national discourse on racial profiling in financial institutions. It highlighted the urgent need for comprehensive reforms and reminded the nation that behind every statistic is a human story, a young boy with dreams, dignity, and the right to be seen for who he truly is. In the weeks following the incident at Wilford National Bank, the world around Jalen Brooks transformed in ways he could never have anticipated. The viral video of his unjust detainment sparked nationwide conversations about racial profiling and systemic bias in financial institutions. Public figures, community leaders, and everyday citizens rallied behind Jalen, demanding accountability and reform. Despite the whirlwind of media attention and public scrutiny, Jalen remained grounded. He returned to his studies with renewed determination, channeling his emotions into academic excellence. His story became a beacon of hope and a catalyst for change, inspiring youth across the country to stand up against injustice. Victor Brooks, Jalen's father, took proactive steps to ensure that no other child would endure what his son had faced. He collaborated with civil rights organizations to develop educational programs aimed at combating implicit bias in professional settings. These initiatives were implemented in schools, businesses, and community centers, fostering environments of inclusivity and understanding. Wilford National Bank, facing immense public pressure, underwent a comprehensive internal review. They implemented mandatory bias training for all employees and established a diversity and inclusion task force to oversee equitable practices. While these measures were steps in the right direction, the bank's reputation had been irrevocably tarnished. Jalen's experience also caught the attention of policymakers. Legislators introduced the Fair Access to Banking Act, aiming to address and prevent discriminatory practices in financial institutions. The bill garnered bipartisan support, reflecting a collective acknowledgement of the need for systemic change. Through it all, Jalen remained a symbol of resilience. He began speaking at events and forums, sharing his story to raise awareness and advocate for equity. His voice, once nearly silenced by prejudice, now resonated powerfully, inspiring others to confront and challenge injustice. In the face of adversity, Jalen Brooks stood firm. His journey from a hopeful scholarship recipient to a national figure of change underscored the profound impact one individual can have on a society. His story serves as a reminder that courage, integrity, and perseverance can illuminate the path toward a more just and compassionate world. In the tapestry of life, certain threads stand out, moments that challenge our understanding, stir our emotions, and compel us to reflect deeply on the values we hold dear. The story of Jalen Brooks is one such thread, weaving a narrative that speaks to the heart of human dignity and the power of resilience. Jalen, a 12-year-old prodigy, entered a bank with the hope of depositing a hard-earned scholarship check. Instead of being met with congratulations, he faced suspicion, humiliation, and unjust treatment solely based on his appearance. This incident is a stark reminder that, despite the progress we've made, biases and prejudices still lurk in the shadows of our institutions. For those of us who have witnessed decades of societal evolution, Jalen's experience is both disheartening and familiar. We've seen the civil rights movements, the marches, the speeches, and the legislation aimed at fostering equality. Yet stories like Jalen's reveal that the journey toward true equity is ongoing. However, amidst the injustice, Jalen's response offers a beacon of hope. He chose to stand firm, to let his character and achievements speak louder than the prejudice he faced. His courage serves as a testament to the strength that lies within, reminding us that dignity is not granted by others, but upheld by oneself. Victor Brooks, Jalen's father, exemplifies the role of advocacy and support. His unwavering defense of his son underscores the importance of standing up against wrongdoing, not just for our loved ones, but for the broader community. It's a call to action for all of us to be vigilant, to speak out, and to support those who face injustice. The ripple effects of Jalen's story are profound. It sparked national conversations, prompted institutional introspection, and inspired legislative initiatives aimed at preventing such incidents in the future. It's a powerful illustration of how individual experiences can catalyze systemic change. As elders, our role in society is pivotal. Our experiences, wisdom, and voices carry weight. We have the responsibility to mentor, to guide, and to ensure that the values of empathy, justice, and integrity are passed down to future generations. Jalen's story is a reminder that our engagement remains crucial in shaping a more equitable world. Let us take this narrative to heart, using it as a catalyst for introspection and action. Let it inspire us to challenge our own biases, to foster inclusive environments, and to support policies that uphold the dignity of every individual. If this story moved you, we invite you to press the number 7 to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments. Subscribe to our channel to stay informed and engaged with stories that matter. Share this video with friends and family to spread awareness and inspire meaningful conversations. Together, we can continue to learn, grow, and build a society rooted in respect and understanding.